What's up, everyone? It is 3 p.m. on a Sunday afternoon, which means you're tuning in to Cannabis Legalization News. I'm producer Lauren, and today we're joined by Tiffany Carwile from the Autism Alliance of Ohio to discuss cannabis's treatment and medicine for autism symptoms. So let's just get right into it. How's everybody doing? Tiffany, Tom, and Miggy, happy Sunday.
Hey, happy Sunday.
Happy Sunday. Thanks for joining us, Tiffany.
Thank you for having me.
Did you have a good 4th?
I did. I stayed home with my son. He's kind of hypersensitive to these kinds of holidays. He's not a fan of fireworks. So my daughter's in Arizona visiting family, and we just kind of had a chill day at home. So
nice.
Awesome. So our topic today is the activism. And if you guys have questions at home, you can email me at tom@collateralbase.com. And if I answer your question on the air, I'll also mail you a book that I wrote about 10 years ago. And that's how I met Miggy. Good news. I bought labels.
Oh, shit.
Yeah, I know.
Nice, dude. But
anyway,
hey, I'd like to just take a moment, though. We lost somebody last week. Activism did.
Yeah.
One of the Daga couple. We had a guest from South Africa on here before, and the Daga couple are huge. They are part of the reason why South Africa's legalization is where it's at. So, Julian, the husband, was murdered during a robbery over like laptops. So
seriously?
Yeah.
One of the South African Daga movements?
Yeah. The Daga couple themselves.
Daga couple themselves.
Yeah. His name is Julian Stobbs.
Man.
Huge person that South Africa is definitely, mourning for.
Yeah, that's something we talk a lot about in the show, is about law and also about like land races and global cannabis perspectives. But today, Tiffany's bringing us a message about a medical application for it. Tiffany, can you tell us more about your organization?
Yeah, and I'm sorry to hear about your loss. That's very tragic to hear. I mean, it's dire times we're in these days. It seems the world is getting, lighter and darker in some areas. But my name's Tiffany. I hail from Northwest Ohio. I'm 29, and I founded the Autism Alliance of Ohio back in 2017, shortly after my son was diagnosed with severe low-functioning autism. And what I do is I'm essentially a medical advocate and activist. I have been petitioning the Ohio State Medical Board since 2017 to accept autism as a qualifying condition for medical cannabis in Ohio. Like I said, I got started because my son was diagnosed in 2016, and I researched the options that were available for medically fragile children like my son, and what I found just shocked and awed me. And from there, I just kind of segued into the symptoms and conditions that correlate with autism. Okay, well, what is my son going to be dealing with? Because autism is an inception spectrum condition. It entails not just autism spectrum disorder, but Asperger's syndrome, pervasive developmental disorder, sensory processing disorder, and other conditions as well. So there's various layers to a condition like autism. So from there, I found a lot of correlating evidence for symptoms and conditions that were treated by cannabis that correlate with autism. That kind of spiraled me in the direction of medical cannabis advocacy with my organization and talking to doctors, the general public, legislators about the evidence behind cannabis as a safe, viable treatment option in opposition to manufactured pharmaceutical medications instead. So from there, I have been petitioning every year since 2017 when I started. So this has been the second time that I went around with the Ohio State Medical Board. And they have opposition, which in turn segued into me reaching out to legislators. I actually emailed the entire General Assembly in Ohio. I emailed all 132 General Assembly members.
Did you tell them about Ohio? I'm sorry. Did you tell them about what they're doing in Oklahoma? Have you heard about Oklahoma's medical law?
I have, yeah, where you can it's pretty much like a doctor's recommendation basis, from what I understand. And
wide open.
Yeah, and that's ironic because 24 states, actually, U.S. states, allow autism as a qualifying condition in some way, shape, or form. Either they incept it in their program as it is, pediatric patients included, or they allow for like a clause like Oklahoma to where you can have it with a doctor's recommendation because they identify it as a lifelong debilitating condition. And I'd like to kind of talk about a little bit about autism and why I actually started advocating for autism in general, aside from my I found with the science behind cannabis for autism, which I can get into in just a little bit. But the background behind autism is important as to why cannabis is such a safe, viable treatment option. So knowing about autism is just as important as knowing about why cannabis is so effective for treating symptoms and conditions that are related to such a vastly broad and widely misunderstood condition. It's shocking how little, not even just the general public knows, but legislators and even people within the medical profession, they are
especially with
they
cannabis.
are at a loss because it's a spectrum condition. It's not one size fits all. So this person has high functioning autism and so does this person, but this person has their own unique set of symptoms and conditions and so does this person. So you can never treat two autistic people, whether they're low functioning, high functioning, somewhere in between, the same way. So that's what I mean by saying even like medical professionals are kind of at a loss for this condition. It's so prevalent at this point and so vast that how can we manage a neurologically diverse condition like autism, right?
Yeah.
I don't know, but like, what are standard treatment options for autism spectrum?
Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about autism first, and then I can kind of segue into the treatment options because I guess the history behind autism is why what is available is available. Autism spectrum disorder refers to a group of complex neurologically developmental disorders characterized by repetitive characteristics, behaviors, and patterns, difficulties with social communication, interaction, and since I believe 2018 CDC statistics put the prevalence rate at 1 in 59, which a decade ago it was 1 in 104 to 1 in 68, now 1 in 59, and actually more recently it's projected to be closer to be 1 in every 40. So the demographic and the prevalence is steadily increasing as time goes on. Autism is a lifelong disability that can be overwhelmingly just devastating in a lot of ways, neurologically, physically, in the ways that it affects a person and their family, in society as a whole, to be honest. Because like I said, as these prevalences increase, more families are being affected, meaning more schools are having to be built, special needs schools. The demographics within public schools are increasing. More therapy interventions are having to be implemented in hospitals. More separate therapy interventions are having to be built, like specialist, facilities, and so on and so forth. So this affects society as a whole, not just the person diagnosed, as these prevalences increase. And what somebody with autism may experience, including intellectual impairment, maybe behavioral aggression, self-injury, mood disorders. Many with autism spectrum disorder face underlying conditions like gut and brain inflammation, oxidative stress, autoimmune dysfunction, GABA and glutamate imbalance, mitochondrial disorders, and comorbid disorders like encephalopathy, IBS, Crohn's, colitis, seizures, pain, inception, nonception, PTSD, Tourette's, TBI, the list goes on and on and on. And apraxia and depraxia are actually inherent within the diagnosis as it is.
What's apraxia and depraxia?
It's just pretty much the way the brain operates and receives certain sounds, and the way like we see and hear things, the way that we perceive things within the brain. So it's kind of like a sensory overstimulation, and it varies with each person and how it affects that person. Also things like SPD, which I talked about, which is sensory processing disorder, sleep, anxiety, feeding disorders, OCD, depression, ADHD. Those are all things that are included within a autism diagnosis. Now, one person is not going to have every single condition and symptom that I listed. However, they are all subject to these symptoms and conditions. Yeah. And it varies with each person diagnosed. My son actually experiences a wide array of these symptoms and conditions, and he's 6. So if that gives you kind of a map, but he's on the more of the severe end of the spectrum. And I don't really like using labels, functioning labels, like high functioning and low functioning, but to people who don't understand autism, I guess, in a general sense, it kind of gives them a little bit of a map because, like I said, it's a spectrum. So where somebody falls on the spectrum is where their symptoms and conditions might be more or less severe. So that's something that's very, very very imperative to know about all of the underlying symptoms and conditions that coincide, which makes autism an inception condition. So you can't just have one magic pill for autism, right? You can't just somebody one prescribed pharmaceutical pill and say, here you go. It's not a one-size-fits-all diagnosis. There's no one-size-fits-all medication, manufactured pharmaceutical medication for autism. In fact, there's no pharmaceutical medication that can safely or effectively treat the core symptoms that I listed within autism. The only two FDA-approved medications are Abilify and risperidone, and they are antipsychotics.
Yeah, those are antipsychotics.
Yes. And
you might be wondering, why does Tom know the names of antipsychotics?
I
can subscribe to find out.
I actually am curious to know, but I'm glad that people do. And what you do from your education, own life experiences, what have you, people need to be educated about these medications because there's actually documented proof to atypical antipsychotics reducing brain mass, occurring brain shrinkage in those diagnosed with autism when they are exposed to these medications. And these are the only two FDA-approved medications for autism. Now, that doesn't mean that those are the only medications allotted to our kids. Those are just the only two FDA-approved medications that they say can treat the irritability within autism. And ironically, in a good amount of cases, it actually spikes rage, which increases irritability. And it also triggers things like self-injury and seizures. So it's very risky. And a lot of that, I think, has to occur with the brain damage that occurs with these pills. Because like I said, there are studies that have been done that show the brain shrinkage that occurs when they are subjected to the FDA-approved medications. And that's not even where it stops. Which is very, very, very just, to me, as a mother, aside from a special needs mom or an autism mom, it's disturbing. And it's shocking. And this is what society endorses as safe. Children and adults with autism are often prescribed a variety of antidepressants, antipsychotics, benzodiazepines, as well as stimulants, which is essentially legal meth. In off-label, untested.
How many prescriptions? I don't mean to cut you off. I'm curious. It varies. So there's no such thing. If I can't ask you, what's the average autistic person being prescribed by their doctor? How many prescriptions are they on? You really can't say because it varies.
Yeah, but I can give you kind of a reference point, like with my son, which I'll do in just a second. And other people, because I've been connected with so many different families over the course of my advocacy that I've kind of gotten a span of like I said, it depends on where somebody lies on the spectrum. And that doesn't ultimately mean that a high functioning individual won't be prescribed medications for things like insomnia, anxiety, or depression, which are typically benzodiazepines, which are highly addictive and are quietly becoming the new opioid crisis in our country. Unfortunately, but that's what our children are being exposed to. So like I said, those with autism, children and adults included, are often prescribed antidepressants, antipsychotics, benzodiazepines, and stimulants in untested off-label combinations in an effort to treat these symptoms and conditions that I just listed. All of the symptoms and conditions that tie in and correlate with autism, aside from irritability alone. And you have to think, if somebody is taking an antipsychotic medication, they're also going to experience side effects, which are going to occur, which are more than likely, unfortunately, going to have more medications to be prescribed to offset the side effects. But then it's a domino effect, and it's ongoing. So like Tom said, about how many prescriptions can somebody be prescribed? That is an open-ended question, my friend, because it spans. My son he was diagnosed with autism in 2016. He's also been diagnosed with Tourette's, GI issues, seizures, and PTSD as well. So last year, he was hospitalized for GI issues. And the GI medication that they wanted my son on spiked him to have convulsive seizures, which led to more medications because they wanted my son on Klonopin to manage these seizures, which is a benzo, which is highly addictive and dangerous, which I'm sure you know. I'm just saying.
Like Heath Ledger, right? An overdose of Klonopin and a cocktail of other stuff.
Well, that's what they prescribed my 5-year-old son. And I heard a lot like, they don't prescribe benzos to children that young. They don't prescribe benzos to people under 18. Yes, they do. Yes, they do.
Yeah.
In extreme situations and severe cases like my son, and even not in severe cases like my son, to where they're running out of options because nothing else is working or it's causing all these other symptoms and conditions, they're getting more prescriptions allotted to them. Between two of my son's conditions, his seizures, because he had a history of silent seizures his entire life. He never convulsive seizures. The medications that they had him on spiked the convulsive seizures. So for the seizures and the GI medications alone, my son would have to take over 300 pills a month.
Wow.
Between 6 different prescriptions. Just for 2 of these conditions. Now, mind you, my son's core diagnosis of autism is why are these other diagnoses?
Yeah.
The GI issues are occurred because of the autism, because he has sensory issues. He has issues with certain textures and foods and flavors and things like that. Therefore, leading to GI issues ultimately caused by autism. The silent seizures, 30% of the demographic of autism is subjected to have seizures at some point in time in their life. Again, ties back to his autism, his PTSD, his anxiety when he goes different places and his memories attached to it, like the grocery store, the doctors, fireworks, for instance. Like I mentioned in the beginning, he doesn't like fireworks. That's a PTSD condition stemmed from autism because he doesn't understand what's going on around him. He doesn't understand what the 4th of July is or what fireworks are. So it causes this PTSD anxiety kind of reaction, therefore making it a comorbid condition of autism. And that's where people get kind of confused as to how all these other conditions can ultimately tie back into autism as a whole. But it all started with his autism diagnosis. Even the Tourette's. The definition of Tourette's and autism are actually kind of similar. It's repetitive speech and behavior and issues with social functioning. That's very prevalent in both conditions. So therefore being a comorbid condition of autism. Well, with that, I went through a horror story with my son with pharmaceutical medications, and I was able to wean him off, thankfully, and it led to an entire steamroll effect. I refused to give my son the medications that were causing him harm. And like I said, those were just for 2 of his conditions, not even, the Tourette's or the PTSD or anything like that, just the GI and the seizures. So I refused to give him any more medications. I weaned him off. And the doctors at Mercy Children's Toledo Hospital, someone in their office reported me to CPS.
Oh, shit.
Child Protective Services got involved.
Well, it was unsubstantiated. They couldn't prove me to be.
But they reported your ass.
Yes, they did. And that's the kind of situation our parents are being put into, and that's why I wanted to bring it up even, because it's not something I like to flaunt. Woohoo! CPS got called on me. Such a great thing. It's
but then that bullshit that you have to go through that.
The holistic approach should always be the first. Yeah.
We're being forced into using these medications.
Yeah. Exactly.
And that's wrong. That's medical terrorism. For one, especially when 17 states permit autism as a qualifying condition as a whole in itself, and an additional 7 other states allow the doctor's recommendation. And aside from that, these symptoms and conditions that my son has are all like I said, comorbid conditions of autism. There's 21 qualifying conditions in Ohio as a whole. 10 out of those 21 conditions are symptoms and conditions of autism that closely correlate and coincide. So it seems entirely hypocritical to me that doctors feel like they can wave their medical pendulum over us, and they accuse me of child abuse when what they were doing to my son was abusing him. The medication they gave him made him lethargic. It made him self-injure. I had his self-injury pretty well under control. Rage attacks started to occur, seizures, but I was the one abusing my son.
Right. The argument is like, why not a plant? Why not this natural thing? Why can't this be my first option? And throughout that, though, Tiffany, what kind of support? I mean, you're new to this. You've been doing this for 2 years when your son got diagnosed. So you're trying to work around. Again, we all know the endocannabinoid system. We're all individual little snowflakes, are all different. So not everything's the same for anybody. But what network did you see for autism for kids? Because there's plenty of them out there for cancer, for seizures. But is there anything out there for autism for you? Is there any networks that you found that you decided?
There are various avenues, grassroots advocacy, like myself. The Autism Alliance of Ohio is a grassroots advocacy group that started to raise awareness. There is Whole Plant Access for Autism out of Pennsylvania, which is a medical cannabis for autism advocacy group. MAMA, which is Mothers Advocating Medical Marijuana for Autism, which is where the group that I initially started with, but they've kind of ultimately kind of disbanded into more of like a directional group to kind of help you, point you in the direction that you need legally, because some states are petition based and some states you have to file a bill. And some states are both, which Ohio is both. You can do it either way. So they've become more of like a directional group versus like, I guess, an outright advocacy group. But it's not, it's more like state to state kind of thing. There's nothing.
Here in Illinois, we have on our conditions, we have autism was added in like 2015 late. And then you're in Ohio. So Pennsylvania to the east of you, do they have autism as a qualifying condition?
Yes, they do.
What about Michigan to the north?
Yes, they do.
Have you ever considered relocating for treating your son?
I have, but I would be abandoning 44,000 Ohio kids that are depending on me. And right now I'm actually in a position to where I have introduced, I'm actually in cahoots with an Ohio State representative, Juanita Brett.
Nice. Yeah.
To introduce legislation to add autism as a qualifying condition, which I will talk about in just a moment. One thing I want to highlight, aside from the symptoms and conditions that correlate with autism, is life expectancy. Aside from medications or anything in general, just autism as a whole, the average life expectancy for the severely impacted community is just under 40 years old, around 36 years of age, organically, because of the autism diagnosis. And that's for the more severely impacted community, mind you. And the high functioning community can be tied to this too, because they're actually 9 times more likely to commit suicide than neurotypical people. So the average life expectancy for those diagnosed is just under 40. That's organically, aside from any of these manufactured pharmaceuticals being putting into the mix. So the general population versus the general population, which is what, about 72 years of age. So that's about half the life expectancy, actually less than half the life expectancy of the general population. So that's pretty scary as it is. Roughly 30 to 50% of those with autism, like I said, have considered suicide. The high functioning community, despite being prescribed wide amounts and arrays of antipsychotics and antidepressants, are still 9 times more likely to commit suicide. And aside from injury studies, and what I was quoting for the mortality was actually from a 2008 Danish study that actually concurred that the mortality rate was about 2.5 times more likely versus the neurotypical community. And aside from these injury studies, the 3 main killers of our kids include seizures, suicide, and heart-related issues. All 3 of these you will find on the most commonly prescribed side effects for the FDA-approved medications that are most commonly prescribed to our kids, including common black label side effects such as suicidal thoughts, seizures, respiratory issues, heart complications, arrhythmias, heart failure, and sudden death. I submitted the black label warnings for just risperidone and Abilify, and between those 2 medications, aside from any other antidepressants, stimulants, benzodiazepines, were roughly about 200 pages collectively in the black label warning, which is all of the side effects that it entails. Wow. Those are the 2 main prescriptions that are given to our kids, FDA approved prescriptions. And I can't even say the 2 main, because a lot of our kids are walking around on benzodiazepines and stimulants and antidepressants and so on and so forth, because benzos, like I said, they're the category of drugs that are classified and categorized and given to people with like depression, insomnia, anxiety. Very 3 common prevalent conditions that coincide with autism. And there's a whole mess of drugs that fall under these categories.
You know what's interesting about that mess of drugs? I bet the vast majority of them, I mean, at least their precursors, their research began before 1992 or 1993, when we found out what anandamide was and what our endocannabinoid system is. And so, like, we haven't mentioned efficacy, medical efficacy at all yet for treating autism in any of its very complicated and complex forms with cannabis. And I see that there's a lot of problems with the amount of prescription drugs that are there and then the side effects that they can give. But what, if any, in those states that do allow it, are we seeing patients being treated with cannabis, and how successful is that?
I'm glad that you brought that up, because the endocannabinoid system and anandamide was my next topic, to be quite honest. So how can cannabis treat a complex condition, a neurological condition like autism? The key is in the endocannabinoid system, literally embedded within our genetic code. We are all organically born with an endocannabinoid system. It develops within gestation when we're still in the womb. So it's very common. Endocannabinoids actually occur within breast milk. So a lot of people are very misinformed or uninformed, and it's very sad. They didn't even teach the endocannabinoid system education in medical school.
Yeah.
So a lot of doctors, even still, have kind of fallen to the wayside. I've actually educated neuroscientist PhD doctors about specifics within the endocannabinoid system and autism and its correlation. And what the endocannabinoid system is, to kind of, I guess, dissect what it is for people who don't know, the endocannabinoid system represents a network of lipid signaling pathways regulating pretty much any bodily function you can think of. Our nervous system, our reproductive system, our circulatory system, any functional system within your body is ultimately managed by the endocannabinoid system. Like I said, it's a signaling pathways. It sends these signal receptors to various parts of your body. And regulating a lot of these functions is very imperative, especially for somebody with a neurological disorder, because you're going to find severe offsets in symptoms, behaviors, and so on and so forth. Ironically, a lot of this can be tied back to deficits within the endocannabinoid system. Research from Stanford University actually showed that children with autism have lower levels of plasma anandamide within their ECS system. And what anandamide is the specific endocannabinoid that mimics THC in the body and in the brain. And it's crucial for learning, social functioning, easing anxiety, and a wide array of other things as well. And you think, what are the typical difficulties with autism? Learning, memory, easing anxiety, social functioning, and so on. So the deficit of anandamide and the correlation between the two is an imperative knowledge to have. And there's substantial evidence that supports the utilization of whole plant organic cannabis as a safe, viable, effective treatment for autism. There's been various studies done. Obviously, the United States is not as medically progressive as other countries. So there's been
only fund the harm research.
Yeah.
Only fund the harm.
But no, that's ironic that you say that, because there's actually US funded studies that have been done on cannabis for autism in Israel, in the UK, in Great Britain, Brazil, Chile, wide arrays of studies. I know specifically the Israel study was funded by the US. So the proof is there, and there are ties, because the answer is always there's not enough evidence, but they're funding these studies and this evidence, so the evidence is there, and they call it anecdotal evidence because there's not any trials going on that have been, I guess, profound enough on U.S. soil. However, the schedule and status puts a big hindrance on that. So people are having to do these small collective studies that are going on in places like Pennsylvania, to where they're just pretty much like reporting in legal states the progress that these people are making, these individuals that are diagnosed, that do have legal access, and documenting how it helps them with hyperactivity, sleep, and so on and so forth, and comparing it to studies that have been done like in Israel, in the UK, in Chile, and so on.
I think that's why they may fund them in other countries, because the DEA and the Schedule 1 substance will prevent it from being done here. But then also, if they're funding it somewhere else, they can just bury it to be like, oh no,
let's not forget
didn't come out on that.
You know, this plant should be a first option. Like we just totally, the government seems to negate the whole holistic option. Like vitamin C. If your baby had scurvy, you would give them scurvy, because in the end, we live in this medical hypocrisy where Western medicine is supposed to be the best medicine, which is in general common sense, right? But like here we have another viewer, commenter, Jesse Burden. He's in Tennessee. His son has epilepsy at 13, and his son's taking a bunch of pills. But instead we're making criminals, just like you. Tiffany, with the CPS showing up at your door, and Jesse, who lives in Tennessee. God forbid, I would imagine
medical.
No,
medical.
God bless you, Tennessee. I hope you you stay safe, man. But Tiffany, it just always should be a first option. So, what are you finding for your boy? Are you finding indica, sativa? How are you finding the right treatment for him for his best what best suits his needs. Because all of this, everybody that asks us questions about like how much I want to start smoking weed again just because it's Monday, I want to smoke weed, or I want to treat my cancer.
I'm worried about my anandamide levels.
Yeah, and that's the thing. You have to take a diary. You have to have a journal. You have to know yourself. You have to know the person you're treating. So, like, what are you guys doing to find your boys right mix?
Right now, my son, he has his card, and right now it's been a battle because of CPS. I just got CPS off me, so I'm kind of having to push the reset button on all of that. What is allowed in Ohio is very minimal for especially pediatric patients. They don't allow us to, I guess, really pick and choose on a lot of things. We're only allowed to use tinctures. So it's not really controlled by us in Ohio, which sucks because like example, like this person has insomnia, but this person has this prescription with this dosage, and this person has a completely different prescription with that dosage. It's not I always say it's not a one size fits all. Same with cannabis. It's not a one size fits all medication. So people ask me about what cannabinoids and terpenes, and that all honestly depends on the person diagnosed because they are unique in their symptoms and conditions, just like with manufactured pharmaceuticals. People are unique in their symptoms and conditions and their needs. It's the state stranglehold that doesn't allow people to get the kind of relief that they need because they're not basing it around the patient. They're basing it around profits. They're basing it around money, and they're basing it around control and power. So it's really, really kind of hard right now to map, especially state to state, what works best. I mean, there has been some obviously proof coming out of legal states and so on and so forth. But like I said, everyone is unique. Everyone is an individual. So what works for me doesn't work for you, or what works for him doesn't work for, it's an ongoing thing. So I actually just started dipping my toe into even talking about my son again, because part of the reason I got CPS at my front door was because of my advocacy, because I was openly talking about medical cannabis at the doctor's office. We are
trying to change people's minds. God forbid you would
Get her.
I should be able to discuss, because my son has qualifying conditions, the options that are available. And I was told by Mercy Children's Toledo Hospital that I would not be able to bring my son on site with cannabis medication. They would not treat him or anything like that. The only hospital that I'm aware of in Ohio that is receptive to pediatric cannabis medication is Akron's Children's Akron's Children's Hospital.
How far away is that?
For me, it's about 3 hours. So yeah, and actually I had to drive all the way to Cleveland, Clear Cross State, about 3 hours again, to even get my son his medical card, and to even get a doctor to thoroughly evaluate him, because a lot of these symptoms and conditions that I listed earlier, the seizures, the intellectual disability, the anxiety, just all of these symptoms and conditions, the GI issues, even in the PTSD type symptoms, Tourette's type symptoms, it's often wrote off as just autism, because so many people with autism have all of these symptoms and conditions that coincide, or kind of like I said, like layers, like it's an inception condition, that it's often written off as just autism. Oh, that's just autism. And unfortunately, I had a story of a family a couple years ago in Ohio, and I leave them anonymous because I want them to have their privacy, but they let me share their story. Well, their son had a history of seizures, and he was never able to get a seizure diagnosis because his seizures were not prevalent or severe enough. So this child suffered off and on his entire life with seizures, and he was 8 years old. And on Thanksgiving Day, he had a fatal seizure and died. An autistic seizure and died. Now, if this child was to be able to be medically assessed in a sympathetic way, that was because the evidence is there with people that have these, symptoms and conditions. It's there. Parents record, episodes and so on and so forth. But doctors always base it off what they see face value, within a 30-minute consultation in a doctor's office. Yeah. So
and you're not allowed to bring your cannabis into that consultation, so you can't show it to him working.
Right. Yeah. We need to change the conversation around it, because what if this child was able to get a seizure diagnosis, and what if this child was able to get access to medical cannabis? Would this kid still be alive?
Yeah.
That's the kind of conversations that we need to be having. Not that, that just comes with the territory of autism. No, not that it just comes with the territory of autism, that our children suffer because this comes with the territory of autism.
Right.
And it's terrifying, because
you should have the option as a parent.
But we don't. And that's the sad thing. Like I said, 17 states. There's Delaware, Georgia, Louisiana, Michigan, Minnesota, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, Texas, Nevada, New Mexico, Maine, Illinois, Utah, Colorado, Iowa, the territory of Puerto Rico, and Missouri are all states that allow. All states. The only thing that depicts this as a criminal act is my zip code. And if I wasn't who I am, being so vocal in the advocacy community, I don't even think that my son would be able to obtain his medical card. And even when he did, I had people coming after me.
Yeah, the only thing you are doing is legislative change. You're just doing civil, it's not even disobedience. You're trying to follow the law. You are doing civics. You are engaging in the democratic process and helping the legislation happen the way that it should. And, isn't that American? What the heck? Right? What are these Gestapo tactics coming to try to prevent you from exercising your free speech rights to have the laws be reflected according to how they actually should be? Boy.
Yeah.
It's there's a lot of gray area. It's like this is a legal program, but we're still deemed as criminals. It's like they peg us in a hole either way. They try to force us into the hole of pharmaceutical medications, but when we opt for other legal options, we have CPS knocking at our door. How is this fair? I've heard stories of other parents who are medical cannabis patients themselves, and they have their cards and they're facing CPS and jail time for being legal patients in Ohio as well. So the hypocrisy within our state around this legal program is very real. There's a lot of gray area here. There's no laws that protect us. There's a law that put forth this medical cannabis initiative in Ohio, HB House Bill 523, that passed in 2016, incepted medical cannabis into Ohio. But there is no, there's legal terminology within this bill itself, but there's so much gray area that's not covered that there's nothing protecting us as patients. Like, get this, for instance, Ohio cards are accepted in Michigan, where the prices are substantially cheaper because their program overall is more operational, functional. It's been up and running for a long time now.
It also faces a lot less opposition and stigma. It sounds like you're not the first person from Ohio we've had on, and Ohio is starting to sound like one of them. Just not great. Like, they don't seem receptive at all, and they just seem so derisive toward the plant. And so it's strange.
They're very it's
why, Tiffany, why is Ohio such a shit show? Because you do have medical, but even with adults too, because our guests that previously been on, one was Peggy and Glenn, who were facing prosecution, finally settled after a year and a half of just floating in courts. And then at the same time, while they were float for a year and a half, there was other cases being turned over because they had cards. What is this non-linear thinking in Ohio? Because it is medicine. It's safer than alcohol. It's something that in society we can be. It's not the end of the world. Hell, I live in Seattle. I'm Seattle poor, and if I was in Ohio, I'd be a fucking millionaire. I'm just saying, the thinking that cannabis is going to turn your world poor or mess, whatever, it doesn't exist. As a matter of fact, the worst thing that's happening is the fact that it's legalized.
Right.
I wish I had a solid answer for that question. It's just Ohio is kind of unique in its own way to where laws vary, obviously, just like in any state, from county to county, things like that, things are ran differently. So a charge here is going to be different from a charge, another county over kind of thing. And a lot of people fell into this trap to where they got their medical card before the program was actually launched. So they got their doctor's recommendation, right? Saying that they are qualified for cannabis, but medical cannabis didn't even become operational until it was like a year behind, until 2018, beginning of 2018. So these people were already pre-approved. So they're thinking okay, maybe I can, whatever, it's legal. It's okay. And some people fell into that trap because Ohio took so long to open up their dispensaries. And there's a lot, like I said, there's a lot of legal gray area. There's nothing saying that we can't be, that we are protected from unlawful search and seizure. Like I said, in Michigan takes Ohio cards, Ohio dispensary cards, caregivers, patients, whatever. So I could go get, product, hypothetically speaking, in Michigan legally, and then bring it back to Ohio. But here's the thing is it's legal for me to do so, but it's not legal for me to cross state lines. So if somebody were to come and, a cop were to come and do pretty much an unlawful search and seizure because it's legal medication, they would use that legal loophole that I went over state lines to get it, even though, okay, why are we accepting Ohio cards in Michigan then? Why is this a thing?
If you're going to go to Michigan and you ran out of medicine.
You're not allowed to bring that medicine back, though, even though it's
That's what they would say. Yeah. But then like it's all the levels of bullshit that is just everywhere in the laws about the plant. And it has to do a lot with the federal status that as where it sits right now. It sucks.
And a lot of it's just a lot of overlapping, like I said, like what laws are in this county or in this county or from this state to this state. Why are we they're pretty much setting people up, like I said, even with parents who are looking for other options for their children who face comorbid symptoms and conditions. They're putting us in positions to be criminals either way. In Ohio, you can't use insurance to cover medical cannabis in any way, shape, or form at all. So it's widely overpriced as it is. It's very expensive in Ohio.
How much is an eighth?
It depends on the dispensary. And I can't get eighths for Jackson, so I can't even buy that. I can only get dispensers for him. So I can't even really tell you because they won't even let me because I'm a caretaker. My card, for him.
So restrictive, like the access. And then it's so strange. It's just not like Oklahoma or medical in Washington State 20 years ago.
Yeah, Tiffany mentioned earlier how it's kind of a domino effect, right? Where if medical cannabis was legal, would that child still be alive? And we have a comment here by Lucy Bolin. And then unfortunately, this is the problem with cannabis. We're constantly full of anecdotal evidence of the opposite, of the fucked up shit, right?
Yeah.
This is what
the
she asked.
opposite of what they say the justification at the federal level is.
Yeah. So add that to your list of fucked up people who had fucked up things and question if every day their kid could be alive because cannabis.
And that's what brings me back, I guess, to you asked me about going to Michigan or moving. I can't leave like I said, there's 44,000
fix the problem
alone diagnosed in Ohio. And that's just the kids, 44,000 kids in Ohio diagnosed. And that's last year's statistics. So obviously those numbers are increasing. And I'm not even including the adults or the misdiagnosed or undiagnosed demographics and communities. So seeing that comment just like teared me up a lot because that's I feel the weight of 44,000 children resting on my shoulders. If I don't speak up about this, who will? A lot of this community, a big portion of this demographic community is nonverbal. And it's a shame. And it's really, really hard because who's going to speak up for the people who can't speak up for themselves?
Especially when it's a crime. People are quiet. People are way less likely to speak out if they think that they're going to risk their family or risk their job because they're basically saying, oh no, this crime shouldn't be a crime.
You're preaching to have pretty much sacrificed your entire life higher. I was a chef for years before I dedicated my life to advocacy and what I'm doing now. I gave up my house and moved into an apartment, gave up my career, and founded the Autism Alliance of Ohio. And I have been working every day since towards helping children, not just in Ohio, because this movement goes beyond Ohio. Like, yes, I'm talking about, Ohio statistics and things like that, but autism affects over 3 million people in this country. It is more prevalent than childhood AIDS, cancer, cerebral palsy, muscular dystrophy, and AIDS combined in children. More prevalent combined. So this is something that needs to be addressed, with the mortality rate being 2.5 times higher than the neurotypical community without these pharmaceutical medications being factored in. This is something that people need to be talking about aside from everything else. And when we factor in these other wide arrays of untested medications, the risk of harm increases significantly, only meaning the mortality rates increase and the life expectancy decreases. How much further can our kids' life expectancy decrease beyond 36 to where people are going to start, being unsettled by this? And that's where I had opposition with the Ohio State Medical Board, is because they have hesitation on pediatric cannabis for autism. Hold the phone. Pediatric cannabis is already permitted in Ohio. Okay. Oh, wow. 4 symptoms and conditions that closely coincide with autism, like PTSD, seizures, Tourette's, GI issues, encephalopathy, TBI, and so on, which are all symptoms and conditions of autism. So if autism is one condition, that entails 10 out of the 21 qualifying conditions in Ohio, and pediatric cannabis is already permitted in Ohio. What is the real reason behind it? I mean, it's honestly, it's money. They say not enough research, not enough evidence, hesitation on pediatrics. But when it all boils down to it, 24 states in some way, shape, or form allow this medication, pediatric patients included. The evidence is obviously there. When you have conservative states like Texas allowing cannabis for autism, pediatric patients included,
Yeah.
That's a huge signal. That's not just because they tried to say that it's a fad treatment. That's what the Ohio State Medical Board's opposition opposers said, that it's a fad treatment. How is this a fad treatment?
I don't know, but I bet if you asked that
Yeah.
opposition person, if he knew what anandamide was, he would have not a shred of clue what you're talking about.
That's the funny thing. There's actually a huge conflict of interest there. One of their opposition people that they had to come in to discuss, I guess, an opposition point to reject my petition was from GW Pharmaceuticals, Dr. Anna, who had a firsthand in the clinical trials for Epidiolex and Sativex for conditions, seizure conditions that actually tie to autism, like epilepsy and Lou-Genet syndrome. So, ironically, there's a huge conflict of interest there. He actually helped run those trials, Anna Patel, and he was one of the ones who opposed my petition. Like I said, I submitted over 500 pages of evidence, but they said that there's not enough, okay? So what they said is that it's a premature decision, hesitation on pediatrics, and so on. So ironically enough, GW Pharmaceuticals, sorry, my desk, same company in Great Britain is actually funding cannabis for autism research right now. There's a study that started in April of 2019 with 100 participants ages 5 to 18, so pediatric patients, using CBDV, which is a hybrid cannabinoid of CBD, very popular. CBD and THC are the two of the main cannabinoids utilized in treatment for autism spectrum disorder all across the nation. People typically use varying ratios depending on the diagnosis. A lot of ratios that have been used in like the Israel's trials and studies have been like 20-1 or 6-1, which would be the CBD to THC ratio. But what we found in Great Britain is that CBDV is actually a very positive anti-seizure medication within cannabis. And when you utilize CBDV, it actually alters the electrical activity within the brains of those diagnosed with autism, and it actually helps reduce spikes in disruptive aggression and hyperactive behaviors, allowing the person's brain, which is essentially linked to synapses, the overwiring in the brain, which links to the overwhelming bouts of anxiety and fear and so on that one may experience when they're diagnosed. So this helps kind of slow those reactions down. And CBD and CBDV and THC have been found to be substantially progressive in those areas, allowing this person to cognitively function better, to be quite honest, because when you're having an anxiety attack or an overwhelming, bout of fear, you're not thinking clearly. When you're able to slow these processes down, you get a better receptive response, not only from your body, but from your brain overall. And somebody who's neurologically diverse and suffers an anandamide deficit, what other than cannabis is going to supplement in such a viable way that not only addresses the behavioral issues and tics and associations that one may have with an autism spectrum diagnosis, but the comorbid symptoms and conditions as well. What other medication other than cannabis is going to...
Especially that's safe, like with the safety profile of cannabis.
Non-toxic. Let's just go there. Non-toxic. But
so, go ahead.
I was just going to say, because we all know GW's the big bad wolf. I mean, they're whatever. But I always like to try and use evil against itself. Could we say, if this test, whatever, because they actually have an autism specific test, what if they just at the end, if they prove yes, these two components of cannabinoids are the ones, blah blah, and then you say, you know what, my plant has that, and so thank you for proving that my plant's the one that's going to do it. I mean, it might help you. No,
I mean it will. It's a collective over time, and it's not just GW as it's in the whole. It's more or less U.S. GW versus international GW. GW Great Britain is the one who's actually funding the autism research. GW in the U.S. is funding seizure related conditions for Epidiolex and Sativex. However, it's essentially almost like they're doing autism research in general with researching these seizure conditions because they're so commonly implicated and comorbidly coincide with autism as a whole. So they're unknowingly doing research as they're trying to dodge it, because that's what I do is I find the correlating studies and I submit them because, okay, if you're not going to directly study autism and cannabis, I'm going to find pretty much just dissect other research studies that have been done as well that correlate, because it's all substantial evidence either way. And one thing that I said last year is, if 10 out of the 21 conditions are comorbid conditions of autism, and there's proof of it within the medical diagnosis itself, and there's enough substantial evidence for all of those 10 conditions, shouldn't there be more than enough evidence to put autism on as a qualifying condition? And since the board has been so resistant to add any new qualifying conditions, they actually said last year that they're resistant because they do not have the authority in Ohio to remove a condition once it's added, and they cannot restrict pediatric use. So they pretty much want to play God in the sense that something could be a qualifying condition one day, but they want the authority to remove it if they deem it to not be later on their own accord, which in my opinion, if there's enough substantial evidence to submit a petition, if there's enough substantial evidence to provide that this is, medically justified, then they shouldn't have the authority to do so. That's not what they're there for. They're there to oversee what should or shouldn't be a qualifying condition, but they're not even doing that, which is why I reached out to 132 Ohio General Assembly members and sent them my entire petition, all 500 plus pages of it, with a cover letter explaining what's going on, what our kids are dealing with, the medications that they're subjected to, the domino effect that's happening, and how our kids are dying because of autism, as it is. And they're being put in positions to where they're running out of options. So they're exposing their kids to these dangerous medications, and it's only increasing the mortality rate for our kids. If their excuse is that our kids aren't old enough, that's cruel in my opinion, because by the time that they get old enough to have access, in their opinion, they could be dead. Let's be real. So I reached out to, like I said, the General Assembly in Ohio, and I connected with House Representative Juanita Brent, and collectively we have, together we have put forth House Bill 641, which already has a wealth of co-sponsors, which is shocking because this is a very stigmatized topic, cannabis by itself.
Ohio, especially.
By itself. Pediatric cannabis and autism all together. So it's a huge stigma topic, huge stigma conversation. So we're pretty much essentially right now we're going around the medical board. I'm tired of pretty much playing by their rules, because even when I do, they use scapegoat answers, and that's all they're doing. They have no viable retort for me, because every single response that they've given me, I've come back with, okay, well, pediatric cannabis is already permitted. Okay, well, 17 states already allow it, so it's not a fad treatment. Okay, well, all this evidence, here's 500 pages, it's not, because they say the evidence isn't there. So I'm tired of, I guess, getting the runaround. So thankfully,
you're not fighting for the case of the Mondays. You're fighting for a legit freaking disease like this. Why not? Why not give it an option? Like, these people are pushing back over. They're keeping you in 1950 is what they're doing, and they're also putting kids' lives at risk. That's it.
Exactly. That's honestly, that's what it is. And we need to change the conversation around it, because that's ultimately what it comes down to. It comes down to people's lives, people's livelihoods, their quality of life. In the Israel studies, it showed that the quality of life for not just the people in those diagnosed, but for the families, their quality of life more than doubled when their children had access to medical cannabis. Yeah. And there's other studies that have showed improvements in self-injury, rage, hyperactivity, sleep, anxiety, depression, restlessness, rage attacks, seizures, and so on. Those are a lot of the main comorbid symptoms and conditions that manufactured pharmaceuticals don't even touch. So what we need to do is we need to look at what we can do to improve the quality of life for those with autism, not just in Ohio, but nationally, internationally, and all across the globe. The cost of not doing so comes at the expense of innocent lives, children, mind you. We must urge those in the medical community as well as the general population to change how we observe and talk about autism. The cost of not doing so is excruciatingly painful, not just for my family, but for hundreds of thousands of other families that are attached. And it's a very definite statement of how society as a whole treats autistic people and their families. The resistance that we feel when we are trying to explore a safer, more therapeutic option for our children. I would much rather have my son on a organic plant than a handful of over 300 pills a month to only manage 2 of his symptoms and conditions. So
not only that, the one that actually stimulates the anandamide pathways for his endocannabinoid system, which is imbalanced. All these other things, they don't touch the endocannabinoid system. They were designed before they even knew what the endocannabinoid system was.
They honestly, and a lot of medications cause further deficits, and a lot of very common ailments that people find can be tied back to deficits within the endocannabinoid system, not just autism, other neurological and physical conditions as well.
Perhaps even cancer.
Balancing your endocannabinoid system is honestly crucial to physical and mental health, and it's not something that's discussed nearly enough.
Nobody talks about it, and that's one of the reasons why I think we don't need to call it medical marijuana or adult use cannabis. We just need to start calling it. We need anandamide reform, because then people will be like, "Oh, what's anandamide?"
Yeah,
well, we all need it. We all have it.
In my opinion, with the known knowledge of the neurological role of the endocannabinoid system in everyone, including the documented deficit of anandamide in those diagnosed with autism, it seems undoubtedly feasible to me that cannabinoid-rich organic extracts from cannabis can be used as useful agents for targeting the pathology of autism and many other neurological conditions in general. Because like I said, autism comes with a laundry list of symptoms and conditions. This condition alone being widely accepted for cannabis usage is a segue for a wide array of other physical or neurological conditions to be accepted as well. So
yeah.
It's like I said, it's another domino effect, honestly, because this condition entails so many other symptoms and conditions in itself. And
I think it's hard for people to wrap their heads around the fact that the endocannabinoid system is part of, if you're deficient, you're not going to always have autism. You could have cancer. You're going to have GI systems. I mean, the imbalance cause all kinds of anything.
That's kind of what I was saying is it's tied to a wide array of not even just like cancer. It's just like even just like regular common illnesses that you can have. And targeting the pathology of autism is honestly something that is crucial to being able to treat these debilitating manifesting conditions that are associated with it. So in my opinion, I conclude that families and physicians should have the authorized right to navigate and explore these options without fear of legal repercussion, despite one's age or severity of autism spectrum diagnosis. We're not criminals. We're parents. We're people. We're everyday civilians. And it's my child is no different than any other child walking around this planet, this earth. He's a beautiful, wonderful 6-year-old little boy. The only thing that separates my son from yours is he has a deficit of anandamide that causes him to have a wide array of symptoms and conditions that correlate and tie back to his core autism diagnosis. Giving our families better options to be able to manage these symptoms and conditions, meaning giving our families better quality of life, giving our children a better quality of life, giving their siblings a better quality of life, giving relief to our school systems, our hospitals, public education, just the Department of Developmental Disabilities that are all over our nation. Just in general, it's a mass scale effect that this is going to have. Improving the quality of life for those diagnosed doesn't just improve their quality of life. It improves the quality of life for society overall. And addressing this is imperative, and not doing so leaves behind hundreds of thousands of innocent children.
Tiffany, thank you so much for coming on and talking about this and speaking the good word. We were talking in the green room. This is one of our first condition-centric episodes, so I'm happy we had somebody so energetic and mobilized. So thank you so much for coming on. Too often, people don't, consider anything until it happens right to them, directly to them. So thank you so much for speaking up. Where can people come and find you at the Autism Alliance of Ohio? I
actually built and created my own website. It's autismallianceofohio.com. You can find information to volunteer, reach out to me, ask questions, find information about Ohio's progress, about House Bill 641, which is the legislation we have introduced, or to find out what you can do in other non-autism friendly states to get advocacy rolling in any way, shape, or form, and have a conversation be started. Or even if maybe somebody's curious about just their child and just have questions in general, they can also reach me at autismallianceofohio@gmail.com. And I'm very receptive to answering any questions.
Awesome. Thanks again. We're going to throw those links in the description. And thanks for tuning in, everyone. We will see you on Wednesday for another episode of Cannabis Legalization News.
Thank you.